what differentiates a topic needing to be addressed in a meeting in a conversational type format versus a formal presentation? What makes you decide you need to stand up and separate yourself from the group and present, quote unquote, versus presenting an idea and creating a more collaborative conversation around the topic? All right, this is a great question. I always think it's so awkward to get up and present to people. I feel like that's something men do, less so women. I always felt so awkward. I'd be like, my skirt's a little bit too short and it's just awkward to stand while everybody's sitting around. So I'm more in favor, if you want to get something done, if you're working with a set of peers, if you're working inside of your company with people you're familiar with, I think the best way to do things is to have, a very focused conversation, but a collaborative conversation that happens around a table or across a room. Now, that said, there are instances where you need to present, right? When I go see the Penn board, sometimes it's collaborative conversation, but it has a degree of formality. I don't know these people that well. They certainly don't know me. And so I want to put on a good show and a good face by giving a more formal presentation where, I would use slides or I would have a very organized talk track. I think the situation on when to be most formal is really dictated by how familiar you are with the people you're talking to. The less familiar you are, the more formal you should be. I don't think you necessarily need to stand up and present. Like, I can remember standing up in the front of a room. I had this one agency pitch where I was standing up in the front of the room and I had ordered this bright orange skirt off of eBay. And it was Dries Van Noten. I don't really know how to pronounce it. But, some hoity-toity agency exec was like, who makes your skirt? And I was like, oh, it's Dries Van Noten or something. And I clearly pronounced it wrong. It also was clearly counterfeit, like made in China, wasn't an authentic skirt. But I felt so stupid after I did that. The thing also didn't fit totally right, which just added to kind of the debacle. But if you are not familiar, if you're asking people for money, or if the decorum in the room or the culture, the attitude in the room is kind of formal, then it's best to either stand up and present and use slides, or you can sit down and present and use slides, but meet the moment with the formality it deserves. Having a conversation with your peers to solve a problem, I think a presentation format there doesn't make any sense. It's actually kind of off-putting. But if you're asking for money, if you're trying to convince people to invest in something, if you're looking to plead a case, or you're with a bunch of people you don't know, then it's perfectly appropriate to stand and present. All right, second question is, how do you encourage collaboration in a meeting? Sometimes I go up to present and ask questions and everyone just stares at me. That's annoying and kind of awkward. One thing I would do to create collaboration in a meeting is, if you're the leader of the meeting or if you have seniority, I think it's great to just ask a question and then say, hey, let's go around the room and give some feedback on the question, or give a simple answer to the question. Sometimes that exists like an icebreaker. You have to be careful about your tone of voice. You can't seem punitive. I think it's sometimes very hard when people present and their tone of voice or their attitude is kind of designed to make everyone feel stupid. I think when people do that, men do that in particular, I find it just kind of shuts everybody up and it makes everybody feel silent. So I think so long as you go into the presentation or you go into the conversation and you're like, hey, we're here to talk about X. My first big question, just to open things up, is, what does everybody think the biggest problem is around X? Or what does everyone think the biggest opportunity is around X? Or what's an experience you've had here that really showcases what we need to change or how we need to grow or what we need to do. Now, that last piece is a little long-winded, so you got to be sure you allow for enough time and you kind of calculate that when you're thinking about the icebreaker question. But I think by starting with a question and then you can call on people to start to answer, people typically fast follow. But you have to invite the collaboration, you have to model the collaboration, and you have to demonstrate, I think, a tone of voice and an inclination of, hey, we're collaborating with one another, we're talking openly with one another. This is a safe, non-punitive, non-judgmental conversation. And so long as you set that up, I think people will readily follow. Okay, so last question is, what's the best way to start a meeting or presentation? Should I make a joke, small talk, or just get right to the point? Ooh, I hate small talk. I mean, I just generally hate small talk. Sometimes I go into a meeting and I'm like, oh God, I gotta ask people how their weekends were. And it's like, it's not that I don't care how people's weekends were. I just wanna make the most of my time at work, and I'm excited and interested and ready to talk about work. And so I think when you're opening a meeting, if you don't know the people there, the first best thing to do is introduce yourself. So you're like, hey, I'm Erica. This is what I do for my day job. This is what I'm interested in. And this is why I'm excited for us to have this conversation. Sometimes a joke works. I tend to find jokes kind of cheesy. I think it's often better to be a little bit self-deprecating or to call out something that's like obviously awkward in the room. Everybody, for example, when a presentation's after lunch, everyone's like, ha ha ha, like, I'm the guy after lunch. Like, you can make the cheesy sales guy joke, but I honestly think the best thing to do is just get pretty straight to the point. Introduce yourself, say why you're qualified to have this conversation, and then go ahead and make your pitch, or go ahead and state your case. And that will get you into the meat of what you're there and what everyone else is there to talk about. I also feel like that kind of helps you get over the nerves. Like, when I'm getting ready for a presentation, I only memorize the first 3 things that I'm going to say. I'm like, okay, I remember the first 3 things I'm going to say. And then you kind of like get over being nervous, and you get over being worried about how you're going to be received, and you can get right into the guts of a conversation. So I think the best, fastest route to getting into the guts of the conversation is the best way to approach a meeting. And it's different for every person, and you've got to figure out what the right approach is for you.